We will begin this course on Teradata Vantage by downloading and installing Teradata Vantage Express. This will allow us to set up and work with Teradata on our own machines, and we don't really need to make use of any cloud provider. You'll observe that in a browser window, I have navigated to downloads.teradata.com. In the middle here, there is a download link for Vantage Express, which will allow us to download an image for Teradata Vantage. Specifically, we will download the VMware image, which we will launch using the VMware Workstation Player. Before we can proceed with the download, however, we will need to set up an account with Teradata and then log into it. I have already created an account previously, so I'm just going to head over to the login link. If you do need to create an account, you can just head over to the register button and fill in the details. Once you are ready to log in, however, just enter the credentials. In my case, I have used the account of a fictitious employee in my organization called Alice. And then, once you are logged in, you will be taken back to the downloads page. And now we are ready to go ahead with the download of Vantage Express. You'll observe that the Teradata Vantage image can be run using VirtualBox, VMware, or UTM, which are three popular virtualization tools. Furthermore, there are images available for various versions of Vantage Express. The latest one at the time of this recording is 17.10, and I'll just use this link in order to download it. Of course, we will need to agree to the licensing terms. Let's move on and do just that. And this will kickstart the download of the Vantage Express image. You'll observe that for me, this has now been downloaded onto my local file system. I'll just pull up the directory where this download has taken place. This, in fact, is a 7-zip file and is about 3.5 gigabytes in size. Let's just double click in order to unpack. I have WinRAR set up on my system, and that is the utility which will unzip this file. I'll just choose to extract this to a specific location, but keep in mind that this particular image is over 20 gigs in size, so you will require a lot of free space on your system. I'll just navigate over to a folder where I'd like this to be unpacked. This is a tools directory on my D drive, and this will kickstart the unzip. Given the size of the image, this can really take a while. I have just fast forwarded the video though until this unpack is complete, and now can exit my unzip utility since we now have the image which we need in order to run Teradata Vantage in a virtual machine. As touched upon earlier, we can use either VMware, VirtualBox, or UTM to launch the VM. In the next video, we will download and set up VMware Workstation Player for this purpose. Having downloaded an image for Teradata Vantage Express, in order to run it in a VM, we will now download and set up VMware Workstation Player. For this, I'll just exit this window, and then from my browser, we'll pull up a brand new tab to navigate to the VMware website where we can download the Workstation Player. The specific URL to navigate to here is vmware.com/the country code, for me this is India, /products/workstation-player/workstation-player-evaluation.html. As you may have guessed, it is the evaluation version which we will now download and make use of in order to launch Teradata Vantage. Of course, if you already have VMware set up on your machine and have the capability to launch the image, you can go ahead and do just that. Otherwise, follow along with me and download the Workstation Player for your platform. For me, the evaluation version is available at this link, and the latest version at the time of this recording is 16.0. This is also available for both Windows and Linux. I'll just proceed with the download of the Windows edition, and in a few moments, this exe file has been downloaded to my file system. Let me just launch this by hitting this button, and then proceed over to the next step of the install. For this tool as well, we'll agree to the licensing terms. We'll then allow the path environment variable to be updated in order to launch VMware from the shell. And in fact, most of the other settings I'm just going to leave at the default values and just proceed over to the next step. You can set the shortcuts according to your own preferences. I'll just leave one for the start menu. And finally, we'll choose to go ahead with the install. In my case, this will be an upgrade. This could take a minute or two, but once that is done, let's move on and finish with this installation. And we are now ready to use VMware Workstation Player in order to launch Teradata Vantage in a virtual machine. Previously, we have successfully downloaded and unpacked an image for Teradata Vantage Express, and we are now ready to launch it using VMware Workstation Player. For that, you can use the desktop shortcut or start menu shortcut to launch the Workstation Player. In my case, I'm just going to navigate on my file system to the start menu shortcut. The link to the VMware Workstation Player is already highlighted. I'm just going to launch this from here. And I'll just choose to finish with the welcome message here. And following that, well, the player has started up. Let me quickly maximize this window in order to improve visibility. You'll observe that there is the option to create a new virtual machine from scratch. However, we already have a VM which we can launch. So let's choose to open a VM and then navigate on our file systems to where we downloaded and then unpacked the Teradata Vantage Express image. For me, this is in the D drive within the tools subdirectory. Within that, there will be a folder corresponding to the version of Vantage Express which was downloaded. And inside of that, there should be a .vmx file, which is in fact a configuration file used by VMware. And this will be used to launch Teradata Vantage Express within a virtual machine with a few useful utilities already packed in. We can now open this up. In a few moments, some of the configuration information for this particular VM will be available. For example, the guest operating system is SUSE Linux Enterprise version 12, and for me, a total of 10.7 gigabytes of RAM have been allocated to it. There is also the option to edit the VM settings, but I'm just going to leave everything at the default value and choose to play this VM. This can take a few moments. There will be notifications with regards to specific settings. I'm just going to dismiss the notification though and stick with the default values. And in a few moments, the guest OS begins its boot up process. I'll just allow this to go on with the default values. So it is the SLES version 12 which will be launched. This can take a few minutes though. I'll just fast forward the recording until the point where user input is required. Specifically, we will need to supply login credentials in order to log into our OS. I'm just going to enter the username of root and then hit enter. And following that, the OS UI begins to load, and we are notified that only authorized users may be permitted beyond this point. After dismissing the message, again, the credentials are asked for. I'll specify a login value of root and a password which is also root. Once that is done, we will soon be connected to our virtual machine, and this is the desktop of the VM. You will note that there are shortcuts available to Teradata Studio Express, which is a client which can be used to connect to and run queries against Teradata Vantage. There is also the Start Teradata shortcut, which can be used to launch the database on this platform. It is possible that the window for this virtual machine is a little smaller on your own system. This is something which can be adjusted. If you just scroll along and then pull up the menu from this top right, we can just head over to the settings section. And then from the settings for the virtual machine, we pull up displays under hardware. Here we can select the specific display on the guest operating system, which needs to be adjusted. And this is where we can set the resolution. For me, this is already set to 1280 by 768, which is large enough for my own purposes. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Though you can also see that there are various other values that can be set here. I'm just going to cancel out of this view, however, in which case if you have made a change, you can hit apply. And then let's exit the displays configuration. And in the next video, we will start up Teradata Vantage on this virtual machine. It's now time to start up Teradata Vantage on this virtual machine. In fact, Teradata should already be up and running. And to confirm that, we can pull up the GNOME terminal, which is the shell on this guest OS. And from here, we can execute the command pde state-a. PDE is short for Parallel Database Extension, and if you get an output such as this one, where the PDE state is run/started, it means that Teradata Vantage is already up and running. There is a possibility though that the database has not automatically started up in your case, and in order to explicitly launch the service, you can run the command /etc/init.d/tpa start. If, like me, you're running this command when the Teradata database is already up, you will get the message that PDE is already running. Another option to launch Teradata, if it is not in a running state, is to use the shortcut which is on the desktop and is labeled Start Teradata. Now that we know that Teradata Vantage is running on the system, we can exit the GNOME terminal and then connect to our database using a client. More specifically, we will make use of Teradata Studio Express, which is already packaged within this virtual machine. A little later, we will make use of Teradata Studio from the host OS and then use it to connect to the Teradata Vantage system within our virtual machine. For now though, let's just make use of this packaged version of Teradata Studio. Once the Studio has been launched, let me just quickly dismiss the welcome messages which pop up. There are quite a few of these in this introductory tour, so it might take a minute or two. And then when the close option shows up, let's just click on it. And we are now ready to begin using this client. The first thing we will need to do is to set up a connection to our Teradata Vantage database. From the dialog which pops up, let's choose the Teradata connection profile. We will need to set up a name for our connection. I'm just going to call mine Looney Teradata and then proceed to the next step and then fill in the details of the database connection. The database server lies on the local host, so I'll just specify that. As for the username and password, the value is the same for both of these, dbc. I'll just choose to save down the password in the client, and then let's test out the connection to make sure that everything is wired correctly. If that is the case, you'll get this success message, which means that our client is now connected to the database and we are ready to put it to use. Let's exit this message and then finish the connection settings. And soon enough, in the navigator menu, our new connection is now listed. Within this window, I'm just going to scroll up to reveal that we are currently in the administration view. But what we really want to focus on now is query development. So let's just switch over to that interface. And from here, you will observe that a SQL editor pops up. We can write down our queries here and then execute them. Any results which are returned by the server will pop up in the Teradata result set viewer. And the history of query executions will show up in the SQL history tab at the bottom. In order to explore our database connection, let's expand the connection itself from this data source pane. And you'll note that there is an item corresponding to a DBC user. On expanding that, there is a subfolder of databases. And when we expand that, well, a whole host of system-generated databases are available for us to view. In the next video, we will add a new database of our own to this list by running a SQL query. Let's move on and create a new database within our Teradata Vantage system. And for that, we can execute this query. I assume that you already have a background in SQL, in which case the command create database should be familiar to you. So we create a new database called restaurants using this command. What may be new to you, however, are the permanent and spool keywords which we apply here. When we create a database as permanent, it means that its data will be stored on a permanent basis, and this will not be a temporary table. Following this, we specify the amount of space to be allocated to this database. Here we set this to a value of 60 E6, which equates to a total of 60 megabytes of storage. 60e6 of course translates to 60 multiplied by 10 to the power 6 or 60 million bytes, that is 60 megabytes. The spool setting corresponds to the number of bytes to be allocated for volatile temporary tables. Here we set this to a value of 120 megabytes. To execute this query, we can hit the play button in this interface, and you will note under the Teradata SQL history that a new entry now pops up here, corresponding to our most recent execution. The question, however, is whether our restaurant's database has been created, and in the data source menu on the left, as we scroll along, we won't initially see this restaurant's database. However, if we were to right-click on the databases folder and choose to refresh, that database now does pop up. In order to view the contents of the restaurant's database, we can simply expand this particular item from the menu, and you will note that a database is essentially a logical grouping of indexes, macros, stored procedures, tables, user-defined functions or UDFs, and views. To view the list of tables, we expand this particular folder, and as you might expect, there are no tables in here at the moment. That is something we will address in the next video, where we will create our first table in Teradata Vantage. Let's continue building upon the restaurants database which we created in the previous video. And as you can imagine, this is one which we will use in order to store details about various restaurants, and those will be stored in a new table which we are about to create. Let me just paste in the query for that, and I'll just scroll up where you can see exactly what the table is. The specific command which we run here is create set table, followed by the name of the database where the table needs to be created, which is restaurants, then a dot, and then the table name, which is Michelin or Michelin underscore awarded. The data within this table will correspond to those restaurants which have been awarded some kind of Michelin recognition. And then within parentheses, we specify the schema for this table. Now, most of this will be familiar to you if you have used SQL before. What may be new to you, however, is the use of the set keyword. A set table is one which does not allow duplicate entries. This is as opposed to a multi-set table where duplicates are permitted. Moving on then to the schema for the table, starting with the global ID column, which we set as an integer. There is the restaurant name, which we set as a varchar. We also have the address and location field for the restaurant. And then there is a min price and max price, which gives you a range of how much you can expect to spend at the given restaurant. Keep in mind that all of the restaurants which we will store in this table have been conferred some kind of Michelin award. So the prices can get rather high, and we will run a lot of queries which operate on these price columns. The prices, though, are not all in the same currency, and to indicate exactly what currency the prices are in, there is a separate currency column. So if the prices are in Japanese yen, then the currency column will have a value of JPY, and in the queries we will explore later on, we will use the currency field as a proxy for the restaurant's country or region. There are also other fields which we have in the schema here, including a phone number, a URL to the restaurant's webpage, and the specific Michelin award which they have been given. Once we close down the parentheses, we specify a unique primary index for this particular table, and then specify the value of one of the columns in the table, specifically global ID. This means that the global ID column will effectively serve as the partition key for this table, and the hash value of the global ID will be used to determine the virtual storage node which the row will fall into. If you come from a background in relational databases, you'll observe that there is no primary key definition in here, and that is not quite so important if you're using the data for analysis purposes. Let's move on and execute this query then. You will note that one more entry pops up in the SQL History tab, and there is no error message associated with it, which means our table has been created and is now ready for use. Let's populate it with some data by running an insert query. So I'll just replace the current contents in the SQL editor, and This is what the query looks like. In fact, this insert statement is identical to one which you may have used for any relational database. Insert into, followed by the table name. In this case, we point to restaurants.michelin awarded, and then within parentheses, all of the different columns for which data will be inserted. I had just specified all of the columns in here. We then close parentheses and specify the values following the values keyword. You'll observe that I'm adding the entry for a restaurant called Aqua, which is located in the city of Wolfsburg in Germany. The data we're about to add to this table is included in the course materials and can also be downloaded from this location on kaggle.com. Scrolling along, you can see that a meal at this restaurant costs 225 euros, which is certainly a hefty amount, but from the last column you can gather that it has been awarded 3 Michelin stars, so perhaps that price should be somewhat expected. We are less concerned with the restaurant itself, however, and it is the execution of this insert query which is more relevant. Of course, before we do this, note that numeric values are not specified within quotes, while text or varchars are specified in single quotes, just as we would in standard SQL. With that, let's execute this query. And following this third execution, we now have some data in our table. Let's confirm that the insert did in fact take place, for which we can execute this select query. Simply select star from restaurants.michelin awarded. And sure enough, the single row of data which we entered now appears in the results pane. This means that we have now made use of Teradata Studio in order to interact with a Teradata Vantage database. Now that we have taken the first baby steps towards working with Teradata, in the next video, we will explore one more client which can be used to interact with this database, which is the BTEQ or BTEQ shell-based program.